What's up YouTube, and welcome back to another Procreate tutorial, where today I'm going to show you how you can create this very loose painting but also very springtime painting design. Now of course you're going to need the requirements for today's design. That will be the canvas size and the palette. Everything else is built into Procreate, you won't need anything else. So if you want to grab the requirements, go to the description of this video, it will take you to a post over on Patreon, and that's where you can go ahead and find all the information and instructions on how you can grab all of those requirements. And then that way you can follow along with the exact same colors. When you're done with today's design, make sure to tag me in your finished creations, and make sure to check out my Patreon while you're there, because that's where I release 3 more exclusive tutorials every single month to my Patreon supporters. The catalogue sits over 130 exclusive tutorials at the time of recording, and 3 more are added every single month. So make sure to check that out. So with all that said, enjoy today's tutorial and let's get started. So once you've created your canvas, the first thing we'll do is we'll go up to our actions, we'll go to the canvas tab, and we will add a drawing guide. Edit that drawing guide and set the grid size to 1/4 of your canvas size. If you've not used the same canvas size, you set it to 1/4, but if you're using the same, of course, it'll be set to 500 and hit done. Once you're done, hit done in the top right. That gives us a nice little grid system to be working against and also match up to each other. Now, just to get started with, we're just going to go ahead and double tap at the bottom of the colors to select black. We're going to go to our brushes. You're going to want to be in the category of, we want to be in drawing and the Blackburn. We'll set the brush size to about 28% and maximum opacity. We just need to go ahead and create a canvas. That's all you need to do. So just press with a little bit of pressure just to get started with and block in the center. And then what you're looking to do is just get quite close to the edge, but not too much. And you just want like a rough kind of square or rectangle kind of shape. You will have opportunity later on to amend this if you need to. So it doesn't need to be the be all and end all, but having an uneven canvas sometimes looks really quite pleasing to the eye. I think it makes it look far more unique and very sort of artistic at the same time. So I'm just trying to look for some of the edges where obviously it just looks like it comes in a little bit. I'm using the edge of the Blackburn brush just to change up that shape a little bit. A couple of little sort of drag outs here and there. You don't want to go to the very edge of the canvas, so I'd get rid of that one, for example. Just a very quick border. And again, we can always amend it later on. Now we're going to go ahead and use this. We're going to go to our layer. We're going to tap on it and use the option of select. You then want to go down here to your selection menu and use the option of invert. So you've selected everything but the black area now. Then go to your layers, create a new layer. Go to your colors and double tap in the top left to select white. You can see that the selection is still active. So if we go to our layers again and we tap on the top layer and fill it, it will only fill with that selection in. And if you take a look at your thumbnail here, you can see that the outer edge now is white. So if we delete the black area here, and then you take a look at your background color and change your background color to the middle of the far right column, you can then see your frame now sits at the top. So rename this and call it frame. And later on, if you need to, or you want to amend it later, just simply use white, draw in on the edges, or use the eraser, of course, and change the shape as well. So from there, we're going to go ahead and start blocking in some shapes. We'll create a new layer and drag it underneath our frame. We'll go to our colors and we'll grab the color in the top left of the palette. We are going to use Blackburn for quite a lot of this. I'm going to set the size down to 10% though, and just keep the maximum opacity. And again, use my grid as a guide, but we're going to go ahead and kind of just run across, a bit of a swoop across it here at the bottom. But then I equally want to go ahead and have some fairly high kind of banking almost that kind of swoops down into there, and keep it a bit messy. You don't need to make it super perfect. We'll block this all in. And if you can, there's sometimes when you do messy kind of tutorials, try to leave little gaps here and there just to show like background color and stuff. To me, I think it looks a lot more aesthetically pleasing to do so, because you have, just the whole staggering and layering of everything. I'm just going to bring this up and up towards here. I just need to bulk that out a little bit better. I can always adjust this shape in a second using like distort, for example. But I just want to have some sort of high banked area here. From there, we'll go ahead and go to our layers and create another new layer. Go to your colors and grab the top of the second column. And we're going to draw in our path. Now you can, for a minute, just tap on it and clipping mask it to the dark shape we created before. That way your edges will be nice and tidy. But you're looking somewhat from around about here, just to kind of like whip a path in like that, and then just go. You can even put like a zigzag in it if you really wanted to, but I'm going to just do the one shape into here and then straight across, and then sort of flare it out at the bottom. So you want the path, of course, to get a little bit wider as it gets closer, but you want to have that kind of just little sort of shape in there, little angular shape, just to give your path some sort of motion and flow as it makes its way further back. And of course, you know, go over it a few times. You don't have to keep it sort of super straight lined either. You know, you can do interesting kind of shapes if you feel like that's necessary. And that's okay for the minute. I think what we could do is maybe just sort of curve up a few little lines just on the edges there, just to kind of show that it maybe makes its way up the hillside. So just on that edge. And for me, I'd probably think about maybe sort of going down to, say, a 5% brush size, and maybe just adjusting, in fact, maybe even smaller than that. Let's go down to a 2 and just adjust the shape of it a little bit so it's not too perfect. You know, we don't necessarily need it perfect, but also a little bit of fuzzy edge to it will look quite nice. A little bit down here too, just to get rid of that straight line. And that will do for now. Again, we can always amend it if we need to. Then what we're going to go ahead and do is we're actually going to tap on this layer, unclip itself. We'll go ahead and tap on it and select it. Then go back to your layer and tap on the dark layer below, tap on it and clear it. By the way, if you're not getting the right result, it's probably because if you tap on this and go to select, you need color fill to be grayed out. You don't want it blue. That's how that works correctly. So what we did there was we cut the path away from the ground, because I do want to layer the ground somewhat on top of the path. So I'm going to go ahead and switch the order around. So the path now sits underneath. And the only thing, of course, I need to do is tap on my eraser, and go to the same option. Let's go to the option of drawing in Blackburn, and then just chop off the end here. Of course, where it just runs off of the land. We don't want it to float into the distance, and maybe you can just take a look at that and see if you can make any adjustments. But for now, that should be fine. Let's then go ahead and go to our layers and make a new one. Drag it underneath your path. We'll go to our colors. Grab the color at the top of the 4th column there. And using the same brush, the Blackburn, you could probably set the size, I reckon, to, I'm going to go for the 2, let's go 5. Let's go 5% on the brush size. We want to make a sort of mountainous shape up here. So you can go like in a straight line and draw something in here, and an interesting kind of staggering here and there. You don't have to make it super sharp and angular. You can have it, you know, quite smooth if you want to, you know, but as long as you don't end up with something too boring. You want to have some bumps and lumps in there, as I always like to say, and go all the way off to the right hand side from your starting point and ending point. So you can drag and drop the color in, maybe just tidy up any gaps if there is any that you feel is necessary. And then just get in there, refine if you need to, you know, add in new peaks here and there, refine peaks as well. Give yourself something more to work with, potentially. Grab your eraser, chop into there if you feel, again, is necessary. It's just all the tools of the trade, really, of just seeing what you can adjust and see what kind of new ideas you can come up with. You know, cut away at something and then add in like a little something else, and maybe just peak something down here. As long as you've got some peaks to work with, it will give you sort of areas to add highlight and shadows to in a moment. So just a little something maybe like this. We can always come back to it if we need to. I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer, drag it underneath. Go to my colors and grab the top of the 6th column there. And we're going to introduce another sort of hill area here over on this left hand side. It's not going to be too sort of detailed. It's just going to run in here and then in behind there, like so. Very simple. Little tip, do not let this come down and run into a corner. For example, if this was to come down from here, and let's do that again, but here, and then run into the very peak here, it's really unpleasant to the eye. It doesn't look right. It doesn't separate nicely. So you want to make sure that your line that runs down here does just sort of disappear, but in behind a flat edge, a straight edge. Let's then go ahead and go to our layers, create another new layer, drag it underneath. Let's go to our colors and we will grab this color here. It's the top of the 4th column from the right, and it's a very, very easy, simple set of hills just in the distance. You can detail them if you want to. I'm going to go down to 2% and I'm just going to press quite firm. But all I need to do is just create something running in the distance that you really don't need to sort of think about it too much, to be honest. And then go all the way around to the other end and drag and drop your color in, tidy up any edges, of course. So you should have all your basic kind of shapes looking like this now. The only exception though is if you want to add a body of water. So we're going to go ahead and go in front of the big mountain and create a new layer. We're going to go to our colors and grab the middle of the far right column. And you want to just take a look in this area here and basically just kind of, you can start off by drawing a straight line if you want to and pop one finger on the screen just to make sure it's nice and straight. Color in the full underside of it. So that could be a body of water exactly like that. But if you want to, you can go ahead and kind of cut into the mountain in certain areas. So like you could have it kind of round in a little bit at the bottom here to kind of show that this land mass of the mountain is not perfectly straight. So you can do something like this. And then otherwise you can grab your eraser, go really small with the same brush, and then just see what you can maybe just chop into here to, again, like create like areas of land that are just breaking up the water's edge, making it not quite so perfect. And you can even chop off the end there if you really, really want to, just to see what that looks like. I will flatten it ever so slightly, just the tiniest bit. Lovely. So we've got all of the land masses and all of the basic shapes, as I like to call them. Let's start coloring. So we're going to start at the very top. This one's going to take the most amount of color and detail. So we're going to go ahead and create a new layer, swipe from left to right on both and group them together. And we'll just rename this group as I typically do. And we'll call it Foreground. Just so things are nice and organized. We're going to go on the empty layer here and tap on it and clipping mask it. We'll go to our colors and we'll grab the middle then of the first column. Still with the black burn brush, of course, 10% maximum opacity. And we want to go ahead and start just sort of drawing in the lines and the flow of the land. So, you know, I want to kind of show that the land flows down in this way. You can leave some of the dark tone in there. Do not sort of get rid of all of it. You want these kind of grooves in here. And then just on the edge of the path, we'll leave that a little bit darker. And then at the top over here, we'll definitely want to kind of show that verticality to it, like how it's swooping down here in towards our path, definitely here. And again, don't be afraid to leave gaps, you know, get in there and also kind of itemize. Maybe there's like a banking of some sort here. That's fine. And you can see I'm being quite sort of very easy going with it. I'm not forcing it. I'm not trying to like over detail either. I just want to sort of leave dark areas for shadow. And the rest of the time I'm just whacking in the color, seeing what happens. Let's then go ahead and go to our layers and create a new layer. Tap on it and clipping mask it. Go to your colors and grab the bottom of the first column. Brush size, I'm going to bring it down to 5%. And now we're just going to work on top of those greens again and just introducing the kind of flow of the land a bit more again. I'm going to make sure that right in front of us has some good green to it. And in a minute, we are going to merge these layers together. So temporarily they are separated. I want the green to sort of be in this area here. I don't always like dragging things right to the very edge of the frame. It's just a personal preference, but I really don't sort of like working towards that sometimes. I always like the content to kind of sit in the middle. Here I've got these kind of banks and stuff that I created earlier. I'm just going to try and sort of accent them a little bit with some nice green tone. Sometimes I get a bit too carried away with being a bit expressive and chucking in the color. So you see me undo it. Here I'm just going to make sure that this area has a good amount of color to it. But also we've got those nice flowing lines that just show us the flow of the land. And then again, some sort of varying angles will look fantastic. It shows the person looking at us that the ground is not flat. So they kind of swoop down into frame. Now from there, as I mentioned, we are going to go ahead and start sort of merging these together. So what we're going to do is, of course, we're going to pinch all three together. We're going to go to our smudge tool. We're going to tap on the smudge tool and go to inking and the studio pen. At the front here, with around about a 5% brush size, you can smudge your dark tones over the top of your greens. You can likewise get the dark green over the top of the highlight. And likewise, you can start smudging some of the light green as well. This is why we also changed the layering earlier on with the path so that we can smudge some of these greens and these grassy blades across. And of course, we're going to have some wildflower in here as well. I want to have that real springtime look to it. So for a minute, we're just smudging a few different color tones on top of each other just to break up the sort of quite boring look to the grass. As you get further back, you want to make your brush either slightly smaller or just make sure that you're being a bit more careful with your brush smudging lines so that you're not pushing too far. You want them to obviously scale as they get further away. So little smudges here on top of those light greens. You can really smudge them all around. Zoom all the way out. Don't get lost in how sort of close you were or zoomed in potentially. So I'm just going to keep smudging along here, seeing what kind of dark tone I can make sure I just layer on top, and change the angle. The grass doesn't always need to go in the same direction, but we're just trying to break up all of these kind of lines a little bit. I'm going to bring the brush size down. I'm going to bring it down to about 3%, just so I know categorically that it is a little bit smaller. In fact, I could probably go down to like a 2. And I'm not going to go all the way towards the back of the scene. We do want to have this kind of break up throughout the whole of it. And you can see I'm kind of keeping a bit of a similar kind of brush stroke across the screen. I am keeping a few of those brush strokes going from left to right, a bit more of a diagonal angle to them. And then here we want to go ahead and do the exact same. You can smudge out. Now I've still got the smaller brush size, so I'll work in some of the further areas first. I'm looking for some of the dark tones there that I can just smudge around a little bit and add a bit of detail to, almost a little bit along the path as well. They can flow in all sorts of different directions, but I'm going to go for a bit of a left to right kind of angle, as if, of course, this is a steep hillside maybe. So as the land kind of flows down here, maybe even the wind as well, it's affected the greenery and the flow of everything. A few more little blades there. Let's get some of these greens on top of some of the light green as well, just to break it all up. Let's go a bit bigger with the brush size again, maybe up to 5%, just to get some of these blades down here in the bottom corner. Cool, and that should just give us a little bit of a breakup of all of that kind of quite boring texture. Now the only other thing we're going to go ahead and do is just go to our brush, go to our brush again and change it. We want to be to the one just below it. We want to be on Evolve, and we want to go to our brush color and grab the top left of the palette. This is the same brush color then as the base color. We're going to set the size to 6% and we'll put the opacity at 83%. We just want to be very, very light, and I mean super, super light, to just break up the edge here of the path on this right hand side. Just keeping it really, really, really light, but just trying to break it up, maybe even sort of come into the path ever so slightly, but just to break up the edge, giving it a bit of a rougher look to it. Slight little bit of detail like that. Let's then move into the path then while we're here. So let's go to our layers, let's go to our path. Let's create a new layer in front of it and tap on it and clipping mask it and swipe from left to right. Group them together and rename and call it path. And then the clip layer. We're going to go ahead and go to our colors and grab the middle of the second column. We want to go back to the black burn brush just above in drawing. We do want to bring the opacity down though to 24%, and size, I think we could stick around about the 5 to 10 range, anywhere in between or whatever suits you best. I just want to go ahead now and just follow these kind of lines in from the hillside here, and then just kind of curve them to flatten them out a little bit. So as they make their way down, they come across and then they flatten out. And then over here, you can just kind of show like bumps and lumps by changing that angle in the ground. So you can see there's some of those curve in certain ways. I'm going to darken up along the edge here by going over it a few times, because I know my lighting's somewhat going to come from the right hand side. And then in the distance, just tip your pen to be a bit more sort of pointed down and just very easily and quickly just kind of run in some lines. Don't overcomplicate the scale of them back there. We're not interested necessarily. Again, I'm just darkening up the edge of the path. Here I'm going to just run in a few lines that are quite angular into the path. And also, just so that I've got some variation, I'm going to go to the 10% and keep going back over again, because I can just layer on the color because it's so low in terms of opacity at the minute that we can introduce some nice color tone and variation in there. And then you can always go ahead and set the brush opacity back up to say like 77% and get some purposeful, quite dark lines in here just to break up the boringness of the path. Even just like a few scrapes here in the middle. I love creating paths like this. A dirt path looks so fun to me. Always a fun challenge. And then I don't want to go too far back, so I'm just going to set the brush size. I'm going to go even smaller, like a 2%, and just go just along this edge and round this corner. That's all I want to do. And then a couple of little scrapes, little bits of fine scrape detail in here, like a little bit of dirt of some sort. It's casting a bit of a shadow on the path. Now, while we're working on this foreground area, I want to add some flowers. So let's go back up to the foreground group and create a new layer. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to start off with the orange at the top of the third column. Your brush wants to change back to evolve again. We're going to get that size to 6% again. Opacity is 83, so it's got a slight bit of opacity to it. And then you just want to go ahead and tap in here. Now, notice the evolve brush does a certain few things. If you tap really lightly, you end up with like a tiny little bit of residue almost. You don't end up with very much. If I tap quite hard and heavy, I'll end up with quite a large shape. So use that to your advantage, but you kind of want to, zoom out. We want some quite large sort of flowers here, and I'm pressing quite down with my pen, keeping the pressure fairly light. Change the opacity if you need to. And then I'm just going to start to make the brush size a bit smaller, like a 2% as they get a bit further back. So I can be a bit more forceful, but also, I don't need to worry necessarily then about adding in too sort of big of a heavy blob of flower. Now, don't forget, we've got multiple layers of color to add here. So we're just going to start adding in flowers towards the foreground area with orange, and then we're going to move into different color tones. So I'm going to go back up to the 6%. Add in some flowers along here too. I really wanted with this particular piece, I wanted to really express the grassy color. I really wanted to show all the different flower colors as well and be quite bold with it. Sometimes it's quite a struggle for me sometimes to go into the quite saturated realms, but sometimes you have to push yourself. Now, one thing when we're done with kind of laying out these foreground flowers, you still want the brush size at 6%, but you want to tip it on its side slightly, because we want to get a bit of a scraping texture in here. And this just looks like, to me, that little bit of sort of pixelation, I know, looks like a ton of flowers in the distance. It's like we just laid in an entire kind of flowery meadow, super quick and easy. We'll do the same here. So all you're doing is pressing really lightly with a slight tip of your pen, and then you can just lay in a whole grassy, flowery meadow along here. Leave gaps, don't add in too much too early here, because we want to, of course, add in lots of other flowers as well, lots of other colors. So, start off nice and light, and then we'll go to our colors. Let's move to the reddy pink tone here. And again, similar process right here at the foreground. Lots of tippity taps for lots of wild flower. We've got white and purple to introduce, so you can really pack these in, but I wouldn't overdo, again, the red early doors. Just, give yourself the option to come back to it if you can, and force in some more flowers. And similar process, just tip your pen on its side, work in some of the flowers in the distance. Leave patches as well. Say here, for example, I'm going to go, right, there's a bit of a red patch there. Maybe I'll mix that with some white in a minute. But you don't have to fill out the entirety of this hillside. Maybe all the flowers are quite close towards the edge of the path. Here in the distance, reds and the oranges all mixing together. A little bit along here, a little bit along there. And then I can tip my pen on its side again, or upright again. Start tapping away, adding in some lovely red flowers in here. Maybe they're like primroses or something like that. Just lovely natural colour to our little country. I'm going to say countryside scene, but it's very much not the UK countryside. But it's a lovely natural scene anyway. Let's then go to our colours again. Let's grab the bottom now of the third column. So we're moving into the white tones. You may want to vary your brush size. It's totally up to you if you can't manage the pressure very well. And then just get in here. Don't go all the way into the corner, but add in all those lovely white flowers. I'm going to bring their size down so I can press a bit firmer again. So I can just make sure I punch in a lot of these white ones. The white ones will look great. Lovely. And we just kept the opacity ever so slightly lower, because then we can just build up a few tones. You can go back over yourself on top of a flower or two. I'm going to undo a couple of those blobs because they looked a little bit too heavy. So it's a real sort of act of pressure and making sure you get the pressure nice and right. Now later on in the tutorial, I'll show you when we add in a color dodge layer. So we'll be able to emphasize a few little bits and bobs of these flowers later on. For now, it's just about getting that kind of spring-like kind of meadow look to this. So the white flower, I think, looks really pretty and looks the best, to be honest. It kind of, the way it scatters in just really grabs my attention, especially in some of these areas, especially if you can make it quite patchy. Like it just looks like natural clustering of flowers. Let's go down here. We can bring some white flower up into there maybe and into the distance. Again, if you do quite a big chunk of color, I don't think that's a problem. And you can always go back over. So let's say, for example, you're adding in all this white now and you prefer maybe the oranges, for example, to look a bit more prominent. Just go back in and lay in some more on top. So we've got some lovely little color there. Let's then go to our colors and grab the purple then, which is going to be bottom of the second column. And again, repeat. Nice little purple variations in here. You could add in some blues as well if you really wanted to. I've kept it to just a few colors. I don't want to overdo it too much. And now some of those grassy blades may end up actually looking a bit closer towards actually like stems rather than just grass. We've got some lovely color, especially right here at this foreground. That's where we want the color to be nice and rich. It's going to really engage people looking at this. And let's see if we can maybe sort of do like a white and purple patch, say like here, for example, like a patch of purple in the distance. I really want to show that this is exploding with springtime color. Make it look very, very pretty. So it's a little something like that. Again, it's got a little bit of that artistic flair to it though, that's not too perfect. Now, because we've added in some bright tones of the flowers, we're equally going to go ahead and go back to the path, create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it. Change the blend mode from normal to add and bring the opacity down to around about 30%. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and we'll grab the color top of the second column. So it's the same color as the path. And then using the evolve brush still, just make sure you keep your pressure nice and light. But I'm going to make the brush size, ever so slightly bigger, about 11%. I'm just going to scrape my way through the path, but trying to vary up my pressure here and there so I can add in some areas of kind of brighter detail and brighter areas of the path in general. So I can just go through there. I'm going to bring the size down to 6% and I can just patch in like quite a bright patch here. I can go very, very close to the grass as well. Focusing it a bit more over on towards the left-hand side where we can imagine that maybe the light is stretching round and adding it onto the path. Now we kept the opacity nice and light because we can even tap on it and bring it down even more. We don't have to really overdo this at all. You can tap on it, turn it on and off just to see the difference. I want that little bit of texture running through everything. Let's make our way back a layer. So let's go back to the water. So let's go to our layers, collapse path and foreground down. I'm going to tap on the water. I'll just simply alpha lock it. I'll go to my colors and I will grab the color then, which is going to be the top of the far right column. Brush wants to go back to Blackburn. We will set the brush size to about 5%. We still want kind of a maximum opacity. And we just want to be very light, but towards the bottom edge, you want to add in a bit of a stretch of blue. Don't overthink this, just get the color in, get some nice blue tones in here. Very light then towards the top, so you can leave that kind of dark tone that was originally there. And then we'll add in some even brighter spots by going ahead and we do need to create a new layer. Tap on it and clipping mask it. Change the blend mode from normal to add. We will go to our colors and grab the color in the bottom right, the palette. Now this will go quite white, so just bear that in mind. I'll go 2% on the brush size. I'm just going to go through it with a bit of a tilt to my pen. I can just add in some nice bright sparkles to the top of the water's edge using that kind of texture of the brush. And that's as simple as it needs to be. You're leaving that top edge there. We could even darken this shortly with maybe a bit of a darker tone in the water, but I'm going to leave it like that with maybe just like the odd tiny little sort of purposeful little dash of tiny little speck of color. Nothing as big as that big bold mark that I've just undone, but like tiny little specks here and there just to break up the kind of boringness, I guess, of that plain blue. There we go. That should just add a bit of sparkle. Let's move into the mountain area. We will keep it fairly simple, so don't stress if you're sort of someone who doesn't really like them very much. Create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it. We'll swipe from left to right and we'll group it together and we'll just call it mountain. And then this empty clip layer, we're going to go ahead and go to our colors. We're going to grab the middle of the fourth column, brush Blackburn, and the size, let's go 10%, and let's start scraping in some detail. So what we're looking for is we're trying to identify, first of all, maybe the highlighted side, which is probably going to be the right edge. So I'm just going to very quickly run in some highlight here. I'm going to come off of, say, this peak here, come in at a bit of a sharp angle maybe, and then I'm going to go ahead and just like make up a few other bits. So I'm just going to come in from here, break up some of those quite bold lines with some scrapes. The scraping is the kind of aesthetic we want, and a few curves at a bit of a higher sort of swoop down sort of angle, like a bit like this, where you can leave in some dark patches. That's perfectly fine. Now, you don't just want to do this right side only. We want to show that it's generally a bit of a grassy area, but I just wanted to make that clear at the top here so that we can then focus on adding in some brighter tones later on. So now you can go ahead and do the adjacent kind of angle. So you've done sort of swooping down diagonal top left down to bottom right, and now you can kind of work off of those and create like little ridge lines here. So you can just follow the opposite angle and just swoop it down in the opposite way, and you create all these kind of ridges. This looks like a ridge line here now that goes all the way down to the water's edge. And go ahead and work off of here, adding in some grassy green areas, and then let that run all the way out. So you're looking for something a bit like this. It's, you know, it's not very sort of perfect in any way. I don't really want it to be. Not today. I want to have some fun with just creating this kind of face of this mountain. You could even connect them together a little bit towards the bottom if you really wanted to kind of blend that ridge line. But as long as you get a little bit of a ridge, it will look really cool. Leave behind the mountain edges though. We're going to add some other colors. So that's what we want to be rolling with. We're then going to go ahead and create a new layer. I am going to work in a lot more layers in this particular area. So I'm going to tap on it and clipping mask it just so we can separate the colors. On this layer, we're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the bottom of the same column, so bottom of the fourth column. We want to go ahead and work in some light tone, and that needs to be somewhat focused. So we're going to go ahead and sort of scrape in and use the right side. Now, one thing we should do at this particular stage is note that we probably need to bring the opacity down. I don't want to overdo this color too much, so I'm going to tap on the layer and bring its opacity down to, I'm going to go down to around about 40%. And then we're going to work in some just blanket areas. I mean, you could even make the brush size a bit bigger. Let's go to say like a 20%, just so that you don't have to overthink it. You know, just let the brush just absolutely load in the color. I'm going to use that ridge line here and just chuck in some green on that side of here, and then just flatten out the line. So your angle of your lines is really important, especially as you get down towards the water's edge. They can be super high, super sharp at the top, but as you make your way down towards the water's edge, things will have flattened down just because naturally it would have become a bit of a flat plane as the water would have eroded things and so on. I'm going to just work in a little bit of green, say on the back of that clip edge there, and then random very, very light patches. We've been working on this throughout the whole of this tutorial, but just like patches of green here, utilizing the tip of the pen, but also to add in like teeny tiny specks of just bits of green and yellow in there. And then that can just roll away into the distance, maybe a bit more green towards the bottom. And let's blend that out. We do have a further color to introduce, so we're going to go ahead and create a new layer, tap on it, clipping mask it. We're going to go to our colors, and we are going to work in this color here. It's the top of the fifth column. You want to be very, very sparing with this. Potentially we even lower our layer opacity in a minute, but we're going to go ahead and identify where the sun is kissing. So I'm going to bring the size down to 10%. I'm going to purposefully now just work in a little bit of this sort of tone up here, you know, create interesting avenues though. Like, you know, don't be afraid to bring the brush size down to like a 5% and tip your pen, point it quite down and say, actually, there's maybe like a really interesting ridge line at the top there that the sun is just casting onto. Go back to 10%, and I'm going to work in this area here and just kind of, you know, blanket in some lovely highlight. I'm going to go a bit bigger because it's quite a large blocky area now. Just kind of just using the scrape texture to show and say, yeah, the sun is casting right here. Up here, I just need to be a bit smaller just so I can get some color on there. Maybe a little bit of that top ridge line as well. And you can introduce new kind of interesting shapes again by just being quite detailed and purposeful with your color application. And then maybe make the brush size around about 20 and then bring the opacity down to say 47. And as you get a little bit lower, you can just kind of let the light kind of fade out towards the bottom edges. It's just trying to highlight the top of the mountain. You would have a little bit of light possibly back here on the edge of here. So I'm going to go over it a few times because my opacity is quite low. And then potentially, just to show not so much lighting, but also a change in the land, I want to make sure that the brush is set to about 20% size and the opacity, I'm going to go down to about 35. I want to make sure that the sort of just the area of land anyway towards the bottom here starts to get a little bit lighter, less green and a little bit more yellow down towards the kind of the edge. Almost like not so much beach, but you know, that kind of this sort of vibe to it almost. A little something like that. That kind of specs. And now we're going to go ahead and start to detail it somewhat, but it's going to be kind of very similar to the foreground. We're going to go ahead and create another new layer. We'll tap on it and clipping mask it, of course. We'll go to our colors and we'll grab the base color, which is the top of the fourth column. Brush, go back in with Evolve. And we've got the opacity 83. Size is currently set to 6, but you'll have to vary this potentially. And then all you want to do is if you press really lightly, you can get that little scattering effect. So, you know, the pixels as we spoke about. But if you press a little bit firmer, you can bulk in some areas of detail. And you can just run like lines through here to kind of show like vegetation maybe. And just random, very granular, very grainy pieces of detail. And bring the brush size down to like a 2% if you need to. And, you know, work in and press quite firm here and there and just work in random little sort of specks of detail. You know, it doesn't need to be all connected. You can create like these kind of wiggly lines and tufts here. And then you're looking really as well in these kind of dark grooves to emphasize like maybe some detail in front, because then that way you've got the light tone in behind it and you can just show maybe there's like a tree line here and the white tone or the light tone, should I say, in behind really helps just have that sort of stand out. But we're just making our way through here now, just trying to break it up a little bit, introduce like, you know, little runs of the ground running through here and cut across. There we go. Look at that. Just cut across the mountain, creating a lovely big groove in the highlight. Now I'm being bold and I'm just cutting away into it. Here on that ridge line, you know, we can, so maybe they're trees, so you can make them a bit more sort of dotty and almost circular. But if you go ahead and sort of draw in with a bit of a line, you can create like the grooves in the land and the cutaways and whatnot. You know, you could even work off of the back of this here and show, you know, the lines flowing in the opposite direction off that ridge line that we created and show like verticality to it by just creating like lines running all the way off and then all the way down here, following that last little bit of the ridge. You can spend a lot of time kind of detailing it if you want to, but also remember the aesthetic. You know, this is something that you can get carried away with. If you know what kind of vibe you're going for, then from the beginning, you know what not to do. Sorry. You know what not to do. You know, you don't want to sort of overdo it and overthink it. And I'm just breaking everything up, creating sort of groove lines here. Breaking down some of those lines. I could go a bit bigger with the brush size again and go to like a 6% and just try and dash in some, what maybe could be trees in here. We are going to sort of dash in some of the other colors in here as well using Evolve in a second. So this won't be your final kind of detailing here. You can use other colors as well. So that's adding in a nice little bit of dark tone there. Let's then go ahead and go to our colors and we're going to move into the bottom of the fourth column. And this is where you can start to add in like far more sort of purposeful kind of forest almost like areas. I'm doing it on the same layer, I'm being bold and just doing it. You could separate it if you want to, but you can go ahead and just start scattering in now some like green areas, whether they're like treetops or something. You know, don't go too mad with the size. I'm going to go down to around about like a 3%, just so I don't overdo it by accident. But I can press quite firm now, which is quite fun. And I can just get in there, adding in like a, maybe it's a forest in the distance. There's quite a lot of trees in here, bushes or trees, it doesn't really matter. A couple more along here. And you can add some on the top ridge lines as well, you know, dashing in a few little bits in there. And it's just a matter of just breaking up this quite boring, large scale shape here and just adding in little sort of specks of something alluding towards something. You know, there's you don't always have to sit and be very granular with it and actually purposefully add in all this content. You know, you can be quite rogue and random and allow a brush to do all of the work essentially, because the Evolve has such a random shape to it that you can just let the brush just sort of work in all of these random areas of vegetation. And I might add in like a very light sort of scattering, maybe tipping my pen on its side just to add in some little bits maybe along here, and maybe even emphasize the ridge line a bit more, separating the two sides to each other just a tiny bit more. We're then going to go ahead and add in a new layer. So we're going to create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it. You want to go to your colors and grab the top right of the palette. This will be the only time somewhat that we use the soft airbrush. So we'll go airbrushing and the soft brush. Size around about 20%, and just very lightly towards the base of your mountain, just go over it with a light, soft glow. It doesn't need to be heavy. It just needs to be a really soft glow, just a bit of a, like there's water and there's moisture in the air at the bottom there. We then want to go ahead and go to our layers, create another new layer, tap on it, clipping mask it, go back to your brush and go back into the option of drawing and black burn. Let's go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and grab the color at the bottom of the 5th column. Brush, I think we could go to about 5%, and opacity can go back up to around about that 80 or 100, either, it doesn't honestly matter. Just in behind here, so I'm going to go down to smaller brush size, in behind your mountain tops here, you just want to kind of show that the sky is landing on some of the stone here as well. So you just adding in that kind of reflective light source of the sky in here on the rear. So it's almost like a little bit blue almost. And let's see if we can do the same down here. Just going to go ahead and work in some kind of almost rock-like lines as well. You know, little scuffs in there. And you can work off of your ridge as well if you created a ridge line. And you can run in like a little bit along here, but a little bit along the backs of some of those mountain peaks. Just hopefully we're adding a little bit of that very casual mountain sky. So let's go 70% then and tip our pen on its side, just adding some variety of tone, like a little bit lighter. Little sort of specks in behind there. And then maybe even like a few just in and amongst the mountain area there. And we've got one more color to introduce. It's a bit of a yellowy tone. We're going to create a new layer. We're going to go ahead and tap on it and clipping mask it. Go to your colors and grab the yellow in the middle of the 5th column there. And then I've got the brush opacity 100%. Size, I've got it to around about a 2%. And you want to just take a look in here and maybe just accent and brighten up here, like with some bright yellowy tones. So I'm going to set the size actually to 5%, tip itself on its side a bit, and then just make your way into some of these areas here, just introducing some bright yellowy tone in there. Now you may or may not like this, but the saturation I quite like, and it just kind of adds in another little layer to the light source at the top here. And if I tip it on its side and get quite scattery, it's just nice to have another tone sort of blended into this kind of scene. Gives it a bit of a paintery feel to it. Now we do maybe want to kind of allude to the fact that maybe this body of water only sort of comes to here. So this path maybe goes all the way around here and then goes on to the base of the mountain. So I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to grab the same color, top of the 2nd column. Brush wants to be quite small, to be fair. You may want to go to a 1%, and you want to just take a look at where you think that it would sort of deem to fit. So I could, for example, come say like along here, and then I can go ahead and just kind of very quickly run back on itself and go that way. Now you don't want to make it very thick. So if you do by accident, like almost like I have, you could undo it. Now, if you do introduce this, I would recommend that you equally go ahead and grab the base color for the mountain, which is this top of the 4th column. And then maybe just kind of just sort of shadow in underneath it a little bit. So like shadow in here and shadow underneath there, just very, very lightly. And then we'll move this path. So at the minute it's quite high in terms of in the layers, but we want to go ahead and just tuck it in. So I'm going to bring the size down to like quite a small size if I can, just to chop away at the path a bit. And then move it underneath that glow here of the water vapor. And then that way your path might just about be able to sort of squeeze into the scene in the distance and just carry on way beyond the landscape that we're currently on. So that was a large quantity of the tutorial. Don't stress, that's going to be the kind of the worst of it in terms of the mountain. You just want to make your way further back now to this layer. We will go ahead and create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it to it. Go to your colors. We want to go ahead and first of all, we want to grab the color here, the middle of that is the middle of the 6th column. Same brush as always, about 5% on the size, I reckon. And again, similar fashion, you kind of show in the light. In fact, I'm going to go to 10%. You want to show the light side of this kind of hillside over here. So I'm going to blanket the top edge there and then just kind of show like an interesting kind of scape to this. Like it's like not boring in any way. Just a little something like that. And then we'll equally go ahead and just go to this layer and create a new layer in front of it. We'll go to our colors and just grab this color again, top right of the palette. We will go back to our soft airbrush just one more time. And we will bring the size down to about 10%. Very lightly, just very, very lightly, a light little sort of blend at the bottom there, just to sort of separate all these areas of land. Let's then go to our colors. We are going to grab then, let's grab this color here, that is the top of the 5th column. Your layers, you want to go ahead and go to this layer here, create another new layer in front of it, tap on it and clipping mask it. So we'll clip to this piece of land over here. And then we're going to go ahead and use the Blackburn. So go back into the option of drawing in Blackburn. Size about 2%. And you're looking at some of this area here and saying, where could I go ahead and maybe add in some sort of bright accents and purposeful areas of where the sun is maybe landing on here. You can make the brush size about 5% if you want to do it a little bit quick and easier. And also add in some random rogue lines that go in like different directions, just to maybe show like the sun catching on like a piece of stone or something like that. But just a simple kind of hillside in the distance. Don't want to overthink it. There we go. Let's do the sky then in the very back, of course. So let's go to our layers. We'll create a new layer and drag it all the way to the very bottom. So it's just in front of your background color. Go to your colors and grab the top right of the palette. We want to go ahead and set our brush size to about 28%. And we want to just go across the screen. Now keep your pressure nice and light so you can sort of blend this in. And to be honest, you probably want to start off with around about 40 to 30% opacity, just so we can build up tone here. But you want the streakiness of the brush, maybe even go bigger. Let's go about 45%. Sort of streak through there. And you want the bright spot to always be bottom right here. So as you make your way further up, if you layer on any more color, because you're best doing it in like one movement if you can, you just need to make sure you keep dragging it all the way to the bottom right. Then go to your colors and grab the color in the bottom right of the palette, and then work in some yellow in a similar fashion. You're working down here and you're just trying to create like a manual gradient. So I'm just going through here now, layering in the yellow, creating streak after streak, and then just blending it up and over the top of that light blue. Now, if you don't like how big or small your sky is, you can go ahead and grab your cursor, just like I'm going to do, and I can stretch it out and I can fill out the space a bit more. I can create a gradient that I'm actually purposefully happy with. The layer that we created may well have just been one that we could just use to just get us started. Now you can also do some cool stuff with this. For example, you could like squish this down on this side here and create a bit more of like an angled shape to this. You could stretch it out like this, and then they all kind of point inwards a bit like that. So you've got a bit of a kind of pointing into a perspective almost. You can really have some fun just stretching out the lines here. I could bring that in and bring that one right across and see what that looks like in there. And it just gives you some more interesting kind of paint strokes. Also, the other thing to bear in mind, you can always rotate it as well. Give it a little bit of rotation in there and tap on your cursor when you're done. And then they all kind of lead into like a bit of a point in the distance. Maybe it's quite fun to do that, but you'll have to decide for your own piece. Now, before we carry on, I just want to go to this layer in front. You see me turning it on and off. Let's just tap on it and bring its opacity down and bring it down to something around about, say, 80%. I wouldn't go too low because you start to get some of the streaks from the sky come through, but around about 80% just to soften it up in the distance. Now we're going to go ahead and go right to the top of our layers, but underneath our frame. So we'll create a new layer, change the blend mode from normal to color dodge. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to grab this bright tone here, this golden tone at the bottom of the 3rd column from the right. And you can pick and choose what brush you want. I'm going to use Blackburn, but I'm going to keep it nice and small. I say what brush you want because you can decide ultimately if you want to go ahead and use something like the dry ink brush. Now, dry ink would still work very nicely, but I'm going to go down to a 1%, and I'm going to keep the opacity, I think, at 100% on the brush. And now you can start to sort of press down with your pen and start to bring out some blades in here. Now, potentially, I actually will do that. I'm going to go to inking and the dry ink. I'm going to set the opacity to 100%. I'm going to set the size to something quite small just to start with, about 3, because then I can be a bit less careful in terms of pointing downwards. So I've gone dry ink now, and I'm just going to isolate some blades of grass in here, picking out just random areas that I think I can get away with sort of brightening up. Lovely. And this color dodge layer now is just about sort of making things pop. The other thing you can do is you can then go ahead and say set your opacity to say 60%. Maybe make the brush size a little bit bigger, like a 5, and then give your flowers a little bit of a dot in the center and even some scribbles around it to show, like, you know, the floral and the petals, etc. So all I'm doing is that's the dot for the center, and then just a wiggle or something around it. You don't have to over focus on it too much, but when you zoom all the way out, it just gets crushed down. So here I'll add some to the middle here of the orange flower, and I'm picking out like a flower that's got like a good amount of sort of scale to it, giving it those little zigzags, zooming all the way out. Let's make the opacity a bit higher. Let's go to about 80% so we can be nice and bold and add in those bright streaks that I want to look for. And you don't have to do every flower. I'm zooming in and out because I just want to constantly keep making sure I'm not adding in too much. And also at scale, just making sure that all of these look like they actually do fit. I'm going to go back to 100% opacity and just add in some blades again, just on the edge of the land. Lovely. Let's then take a look and do exactly the same over here. So if I'm moving a bit fast, potentially, of course you can slow me down in the player on YouTube anyway, but you can, I'm just doing exactly the same thing. I'm just doing it over here now. Blades of grass, random scattering of blades of grass in here. Seeing what I can pick out. Lovely. And then maybe even like something like I can go up to a slightly higher 30% and tip my pen on its side. And, you know, maybe we can find something maybe in the path down here, you know, little scribbles and dashes and patches in the path, maybe, you know, just to take that bit of an artistic liberty right at the very end. And I'm looking for where I've got maybe highlights in there that I can maybe just dash some additional tone onto, or just patch in something else, just having some fun with it, seeing what we can really pull out. So my color dodge layer at the very end is always about sort of taking an artistic liberty and sort of really pushing it to its limits and brightening up the very edge of the land there. I'll go to 19%. I'll scrape in some color there, and then maybe even in some of the grass I can, you know, brighten it up with some additional patches of bright tone in there. Over here where the light is probably completely unobstructed, I could go ahead and brighten that up, but again, you risk blowing it all out. So take your time and try not to, you know, overdo certain bits. Tip your pen on its side where you think is necessary, but it's just me just having some fun and artistic liberty at the very, very end. And you don't just need to necessarily do a color dodge layer and bring highlights into play. You can do other things, such as you could add in a shadow layer right at the end. It's just part of my sort of processes sometimes that I really enjoy, just to really say, yeah, like I said, let's have some fun. For example, here on the water, you can maybe go ahead and just sort of dash in a few bits and bobs in there if you feel like it's necessary and brighten it up. Your mountain edges, perhaps you could go down to like a 9% maximum opacity and say, actually, you can get in there along your mountain as well. I'm going to switch back to the Blackburn brush. I'm going to go back into drawing in the Blackburn, and you just have to keep the size quite small and just sort of seeing what kind of lines we can introduce here. Just random, you know, random accents to highlight. That's all it is. So if you think I'm working to something in particular, all I'm doing is just making sure, like towards those highlight edges, maybe I can think about sort of stretching in and adding in some additional little bits of tone in there. That's all it is. Maybe a little sort of scribble back here on top of that mountain edge. And maybe even we sort of brighten up the edge in general. You know, give it like a little bit of a glow. Over here towards the far, far left, maybe just the tiniest little bit on there as well. Don't want to be too firm with it, so I'm going to bring the opacity down to 65%. And then in the sky, let's go ahead and just bring the opacity down to say 40%, and then I'm going to follow suit with some of those lines and just seeing if I can just run some additional brighter lines in here just to sort of brighten up the sky. And then I'd probably go back into my foreground group and just keep working in the flowers with the Evolve brush again. So the red and like just seeing what kind of larger amounts of sort of splatters here and there we can maybe introduce for some nice red tones. You know, really see if you can spend some time being quite nice and decorative with this and seeing what kind of additional patches of color you can introduce, large flowers, small flowers, and so on. And just seeing if you can really emphasize that beautiful springtime aesthetic, again, that I really wanted to demonstrate today. So I'm looking for like all the little gaps in here now and just seeing if I can add some more, maybe a little bit of the orange again. I typically keep these types of things in towards the very latter stages of my tutorials, just so you know what I would amend, what I think you should maybe look for if you've got additional spare time to do so. And maybe even go in with like this yellow tone at the bottom of the third column from the right and see if you can add in some like nice yellow in there as well. Lovely, nice and colorful, nice and fun. And then I'm going to go ahead and turn off my drawing guide. I'm going to go ahead and pinch with 2 fingers, go full screen with 4, and we end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed this quite artistic and sort of very loose painting style. As always, make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them, like Instagram or Facebook. They're great places for me to see your finished work. Amazing. I've been releasing a Procreate tutorial every single week for over 4 years now. So if you'd like to support the channel and not miss out on all of that content, make sure to subscribe. And if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and join me over on Patreon. That's where I post 3 exclusive tutorials every single month to my Patreon supporters. That catalogue is well over 130 exclusive tutorials at the time of recording, and with 3 more added every single month, it just continues to grow. So make sure to check that out using the link in the description down below. And if you like this video here on YouTube, you will love this one on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.